Welcome to the Feisty Women's Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Sara Gross, Ironman champion, PhD in women's history, and founder and CEO of Feisty Media. I started this show because I wanted to cut through the BS of diet culture and fitness culture and actually learn from high-achieving women at the top of their game who have figured out how to feel and perform their best at every stage of life. So I chat with experts, elite athletes, and leaders who have learned to succeed despite the massive gender data gap in exercise and medical science and product development. Every episode is filled with information, advice, and anecdotes that will help you fulfill your potential as an athlete, mom, leader, or business owner. And listen up. If you don't subscribe to our Women's Performance newsletter, you are definitely missing out. It's totally free. So head over to womensperformance.com and subscribe now. That's womensperformance.com. This podcast is a production of Feisty Media. Hi, Feisties. Well, it has been a exciting and huge week here at Feisty Media because our new course, Strong, which is powered by our partner Previnex, is going on sale starting this week, Wednesday, August 23rd. And we've been working hard with our experts to make the best course possible. And I really want to share with you a little bit about why we chose to create a course about strength training for women. For a really long time, like years, we've been hearing and telling people, women in particular, that they need to lift heavy shit. But what does that really mean? Like, does Pilates count? Can we use kettlebells or dumbbells? Do we mean a barbell that's like loaded up with 250 pounds? How many sets do we do? How many reps? And we also know that the gym, especially lifting gyms, can sometimes be an intimidating space. I mean, I know I feel self-conscious about my form all the time. So where do we start and how do we fit strength training into everything else we are doing, like running or cycling, triathlon, or just our busy lives in general? And answering all these questions is basically why we created this course. The course itself is shaping up incredibly. Our experts are amazing. And it's not just about lifting. It's not just a program, but everything someone would need to know to support their lifting journey. So it includes information about goal setting, the physiology of strength training and how it affects our muscles, tendons, bones, and hormones, how to think about our strength program through the different stages of our lives, like puberty, midlife, pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and postmenopause, a lot of those areas where we may not feel entirely supportive in most strength programs on the market. We also talk about how to fuel our lifting program and how to remain injury-free. And finally, we offer the lifting program along with everything you need to make the program suited to your needs and lifestyle. Each module is presented by an expert in their field, of course, and today's guest on the podcast is one of those experts, Cassi Niemann. Cassi is the owner of CAS Strong, a barbell strength coach, and the lead You Can Row 2 master rowing instructor with Concept 2. She provides online coaching through Barbell Medicine and offers in-person training sessions in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So last weekend, Cassi flew up to Victoria, where I live and where Feisty HQ is, and we recorded 60 videos that are all part of the course. We show you every movement from body weight to dumbbell to barbell, so you know exactly what to do. During today's conversation, Cassi and I talk about why women in particular need to lift, what is the right age to start, how much do we really need to know about proper form before we start a lifting program, how important is flexibility and mobility as part of our strength routine. We talk about how we fit in a lifting program if we're an endurance athlete. How does that fit into our training? And all of this is coming up right after we hear from the people who make this podcast possible. As we head into summer, rest and recovery are critical for improving sports performance, reducing stress, and living a long and healthy life. We should all invest in better sleep.
So think about the thing you lay your head on for 8 hours a night. If it's not exactly right for you, it can lead to needless tossing and turning, or worse, have you waking up with an unrelenting kink in your neck. My new Lagoon pillow has helped me improve my sleep immensely by pairing me with the performance pillow that has everything I need. So I personally was matched with the Otter pillow. Shout out to Team Otter, which I love because it has a gentle cooling effect. And I was able to choose how much stuffing I wanted in it, which is super important to me because I'm doing a decent amount of CrossFit these days and my shoulders are kind of creaky. So having a pillow that is stuffed just to the right height keeps my neck and head in exactly the right position and comfortable for the entire night. And as of fall 2023, Lagoon launched their 100% mulberry silk pillowcases. It's cool to the touch, buttery soft, and great for your skin and hair. You've got to go check out this pillowcase if you want to feel great and look great every morning. Waking up for morning workouts has never felt better. I'm refreshed and pain-free thanks to my Lagoon pillow. To check it out for yourself, go to lagoonsleep.com/performance and take the 2-minute sleep quiz to find your perfect pillow match. And then use the code PERFORMANCE for 15% off your first purchase. That's code PERFORMANCE at lagoonsleep.com/performance, whole 15% off, and the link is in the show notes. You can just click through there.
For decades, running shoes have been researched, tested, and designed for men. Brands have relied on the shrink it and pink it approach to sell male shoes to female customers. That's why we are so excited to be working with Hedas. Hedas designs athletic footwear for women that elevates performance, safety, and style. Hedas unlocks the science behind women's biomechanics through dedicated research, creates better shoes for women that support their longevity and performance, and establishes new design standards to promote transparency in a male-biased industry. Hedas have a lower ankle collar to reduce rubbing, a breathable mesh toe box to allow for ventilation and to allow for female toe shape, a special kind of plate in the midsole to keep tired legs going, a narrow heel cup to reduce heel slippage and take the pressure off our Achilles, and a rounded instep to create a snug fit. Hedas has 3 shoe models designed for different sessions: the Alma Cruise for long runs, the Alma Tempo for training days, and the Alma Speed for pushing the pace. I've personally been running in the Alma Cruise and I love them. It's the shoe I always wanted and never knew I needed. The fit is perfect in every way. You can get your own pair of Hedas at hedas.com and use the code Feisty20 for 20% off. That's Feisty20 at hedas.com, and it will all be in the show notes. As a former pro triathlete who now does very amateur CrossFitting for fun and is in perimenopause, meaning I can't count on my hormones to be consistent anymore, one of my main limitations is the speed at which I build muscle. It just doesn't come easily for me. I wanted to make sure I am actually getting the benefits of the little time I do have to work out. That's why AminoCo's Perform is the perfect product for me. It tastes good, and I just sip on it before and during my workouts. The AminoCo's Perform formula has clean ingredients and is great for your everyday routine to help give your body the fuel it needs to perform at its best and recover faster and stronger from workouts. What's even better is that AminoCo's Perform was created by former Harvard professor and world-renowned clinical researcher Dr. Wolf. As a competitive athlete, Dr. Wolf has completed 62 marathons in under 2:30. Whoa, and is still fueling his body with Perform at age 75. So if you are looking for a nutritional advantage when it comes to boosting your peak athletic performance, I recommend you give Perform a try. It's scientifically 3 times more effective on a gram-for-gram basis than any other protein source.
Get 30% off your order of Perform by using Performance when you visit aminoco.com/performance. That's AMINOCO.com/performance for 30% off. Cassi, hi, so good to see you.
Very good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. I like to start almost every time. I realized I have a something that I ask every guest almost every time, which I haven't really acknowledged before, but as I was writing the questions for you, I was like, oh yeah, I do kind of start in this place. And it's because I think like as women, or like I think that we find sport to be empowering in our lives. And so I like to ask people when they first come on, like, were you an active child? Did you play sport? I know you're like a multifaceted sports woman now, but where did you start?
Well, I actually do believe that I don't think that I'm totally unique. I just know that I approach sport as an adult differently because of how much it was involved in my life as a child. It was like epically involved in my life. And a lot of times I'm coaching or working with people that it was not. And so I have really come to acknowledge that my experiences may be different than many of the people I reach out to, just for the exact reason you said, like, when you ask that question, one, I think it's really cool because you're not asking if they were involved in sports, you're asking how, and so you're kind of coming at it from a different angle. I like that. But I started gymnastics when I was 2, and I wasn't, yeah. And that's nothing, right? Lots of kids start when they're 3. Somehow my mom got me in earlier, but many kids do that. The thing was, like, by the time I was 6, I was competing and I was at an elite level in high school. And I like to say that I retired when I was 15. I had a very dramatic experience in that, just mentally, gymnastics is super hard. And but I do believe that it was very like fundamental to my growth as a person, and also as having a relationship with sport and movement. And I just feel like that has been a running guide throughout my whole life. And so sometimes I have to step back and really see that I might come to sport now as a mid-40-year-old, 43, I should say. I don't know how you said mid-40s, right? Oh, mid-40s. There you go, mid-40s.
That's for those of us like me who are like 47, like as I'm creeping towards 50, I'm like mid-40s. I'm in my
I'm almost 44. But I just, sometimes it's important that I acknowledge that difference. But I did gymnastics, like I said, and it was my life, like everything. And then I ended up doing track and field in high school once I quit gymnastics, or retired, I should say. And it just seemed like a safer alternative at the time, like when your brain is growing and your body's changing a lot. And then I really enjoyed that. I was a sprinter and a jumper. And then when I went to college, I started rowing, and I have rowed ever since. And that's been like kind of my running sport.
Right.
And now I lift, and I guess like now my sport of choice might be powerlifting, but I feel like powerlifting is a segue into a lot of other strength sports. I just did a Highland Games event.
You did?
Yeah. Which is like,
what did you like do the tabor toss and all those
yes.
things? Okay. What are the events that you did? That's so fun.
And that's the exact thing. Like, it was fun. And it wasn't, I do have to admit, like, going in strong obviously gives you like a leg up, but like, you really just, it's the skill of learning how to do those things. But like, for the most part, it was just like fun and like very doable. So I'm going to fudge all the names. They have very special names, but yes, one was the caber toss, and that one was just thrilling to like pick up a
it's essentially like a tree trunk. Yeah, a telephone pole. How much does that thing weigh?
Well, they're all different.
Okay.
They have like funny names. I think this one was called like the hernia or something. But they have all different sizes, and the way it works is you have like an entry size that's generally smaller, and if you can flip it, then you can go on to the next. It's kind of the qualifier, and then you go up a level,
Right.
And so that was super cool. And it's also, everybody's drinking beers and they're at a festival and there's bagpipes and you're wearing a kilt. You have to wear a kilt.
You have to wear, even the women?
Yes,
Wow.
Everybody has to wear a kilt. Yeah.
Okay.
Then there's it has a special word and I can't remember it, but it's essentially like shot put. You're throwing like two big stones. And again, you have a small stone and then a bigger stone. And
are they actual
rules.
Stones?
Yes.
These have been like brought out of the woods into this is amazing.
Those are the like fun parts of it, and that like they are never going to be the same, like event to event, and what you practice with will feel different. And then there's you're essentially swinging what feels like a kettlebell over a height. That was kind of scary because you're afraid the kettlebell's going to fall on your head. Right. But it's like a weight attached to a chain. And then another one where you're spinning with a weight attached to a chain and then you let it go. I mean, seriously, it's horribly dangerous. Like it's going to take somebody out. And then there's a hammer, which is essentially like a PVC pipe with a big like lead ball on the end that you whip around your head and then you let it go. And they wear these things called murder boots that are like boots. Yeah, they're like a boot with like a knife that sticks out of the front so you can stick your foot into the ground. It's a wild sport. And I have to say it was just so much fun. And everybody was like so welcoming. And it was just, I felt capable of just doing it.
Right. Because you feel like sometimes from lifting, and that's what I was going to ask you about next, is like what you love about lifting. And what I've really been noticing recently is that I am, especially this summer versus last summer, because I'm out doing more active things, whatever, I'm stronger. So like, actually it's just less difficult to like carry, like camping. I can like carry 2 paddle boards down to the water. Like when the kids can't do it, I'm like, no problem. I got it. Like, whereas previously I would have been a 1 paddle board at a time kind of person, like little things like that make a big difference. I just feel strong and capable. And I would love to toss a tabor or throw a rock. That's amazing.
Yeah. And it's like, that's the thing, right? Like you just have this increased capacity, this internal trust in your body that it can do the thing. And I convinced some other women in the gym to join me and some of my clients, and they're like, oh, I can't do that. I've never done it. I'm like, I've never done it. Like, right. We're going to learn together. But the thing is it's just a display of our strength and in a fun way that's just different enough. And I mean, when it comes to powerlifting, I've certainly done many powerlifting meets and I enjoy that type of competition, but sometimes you get really niched down, and you're like, oh, if I don't do this, then I'm a failure. Everything I've done up to this moment has, been for naught. And so when you get to do something that's fun and you're like totally out of your comfort zone and you're like, it doesn't matter. And it's just fun. But I think, that's one of the things I love about lifting is it just makes me trust in my ability to do hard things.
Yeah. And does that apply mentally as well? Like, do you feel like it crosses over? Like you can do hard things with your body, therefore you feel more capable, more broadly, like emotionally or mentally, or the other things in your life?
100%. I've been having this like growing realization because the best thing about coaching is I get to interact with people on a daily basis and really develop relationships with people and get to know them. And I coach people online and in person, and I love both. I get that relationship in both. But when I'm with someone in person, one of the things that I've noticed is like the way that people respond to a heavy bench press is somewhat similar to the way that they respond to a challenge in life.
Right.
And I don't think this is like blanket, it's just anecdotal, whatever. But like I had one client who, after a while, after a couple weeks or, month or whatever of kind of building up in weight and doing the same movement again and again, we get to a point where it really gets challenging and they might fail. And I had one client and the bar came down and she thought to herself, I can't do it. And she just started giggling. And I was like, wow, that's your like response system, like that you just start laughing.
I kind of relate to that a little bit, actually. Yeah.
But we had this whole discussion about how that's actually how she reacts to things in the world. She tries to minimize the threat, right? By laughing and like kind of turning her side to it. And so it was a way for her to say like, okay, this is what I do. And she was working on that in her normal day-to-day life interactions with people, her relationships. And so it was like almost, I don't want to say like a safe space, but it was like, okay, we know this bench press is coming. We know it's going to be hard. Mm-hmm. How are you going to react this time? And not that like a heavy bench press is going to solve all your problems, but I do think like the way that we deal with a challenge, the way that we deal with hard things inside the gym totally has a carryover to the way we deal with things when they get tough. And like just learning how to overcome obstacles, build habits, talk to people. I require my clients to use RPE, which is a rating of perceived exertion, which is super nuanced, and they have to think about it, their feelings, right? And so like you have to develop this like well-rounded response to what you're doing. And I totally think it applies to the real world. Totally.
Yeah. Totally. I think I often think of like sport. It's kind of like we say it's like a microcosm of society or a microcosm of life. Like we talk about things in that way, where we talk about, I used to do Ironman triathlon. We talk about like an Ironman. It's like an analogy for life or whatever. But I also think to expand on that, it's like like sport lifting too, or sport. It's like a safe place to learn those skills, because ultimately like what happens if you fail on your bench press?
Nothing, honestly.
The repercussions, just like what somebody rescues you from under the bar, you know what I mean? Like, and whatever, but it's a good way. That's a place. It's like a safe space to learn skills. Like you just said, right? Where that then could be applied to the real world when actually your challenge might be like something as difficult as like making sure you've got food on the table, or like overcoming a death of a loved one, or something that's like a real legit challenge. So that's part of why. And I love like what you said, like with lifting too, because it happens so quickly. Like you don't have to do an entire Ironman triathlon to like help. You know what I mean? Like you can just be like, get under the bar, and how well am I doing that?
Yeah. And it can also be like super small things too. One of the more important things you can do when you start training is just be consistent, right? And oftentimes building a habit is the hardest thing to do. That's why there's gazillion books about it, right? And everybody's trying to hack it, right? How do we hack building those habits? And this is a real testament or a real experience where if you just keep showing up, you see the change start to happen. And that's what, even why I said, when you fail your bench press, what happens? Nothing, because really it doesn't matter, right? Like whatever you do on that one day doesn't matter. It's really this like culmination of all the days that starts to build up. And I think it's an opportunity to really see that happen. And then you can apply it to other things, because once you decide, okay, I'm going to go to the gym every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that means you have to like pack your lunch or pack your bag or whatever. And then some other habit gets created and then some other thing happens. And so that's where I think it can like spread out into the rest of your existence.
Yeah.
But I think that, like you said, it applies to kind of any sport. It's just, we're really good at setting goals for active things. I think probably not everybody, but a lot of people are good at like, I'm going to run a 5K in January. And so then they do the thing versus like, I'm going to save money or,
right.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think we should learn more how to apply those things that we're learning into others. Maybe that's our next Feisty course.
Great. I will sign up.
Excellent. Okay, why is it that women in particular, like why do you think women in particular need to lift?
I think everybody needs to move their body, right? And women are no different, aren't different from everybody, right?
Right.
They're no more special than everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what is, instead of thinking about it from that perspective of like why women especially need to do it, is more like everyone needs to do it. It's just historically women haven't always been invited to do this thing. Right. So it's not like they're going to get some extra thing from it that everybody else won't. It's just, we all need to be using our body and moving it in different positions and creating stresses on our body to make it adapt and make ourselves feel capable. And that applies, like I said, to everyone. Specifically, we get those kind of same benefits in that, like, it's just going to help us build a stronger bones and have a higher bone density. We reduce the risk of injury or illness. It's not taking away that you will get injured, you will get sick, right? That's still going to happen, but it just reduces the risk. And again, like, none of these things are specific really to women. It's just, it's important to everybody. It's just historically, those things haven't been applied. And so we often kind of fall on these things that make it more special, but everyone benefits. I guess it kind of goes back to why I love lifting, right? Is also this feeling of like empowerment that you get from doing this thing that perhaps in the past was not available to you. And I think that's super exciting. I love seeing people change their perspective around of like, oh, that space is not for me, I'll never feel comfortable there, to all of a sudden that's their community, that's their space. And so that's a super exciting part of training to me. And then it's just at a time when we're often told to take up less space, be smaller, be quieter, things like that. Strength training in general is loud, and you take up space, and you're taking up space sometimes in a space that wasn't meant for you or wasn't built with you in mind. So that can also like create a different approach to everything else you do in life. And then, we could go down the list of all the things that we know of, like I said, like the bone density, and you're stronger, and you're you'll potentially change the way your hormones are interacting and your metabolism, and all those like kind of spice words that like get people like, yeah, right. But again, they're all just ways to like level us up to where everybody else has been all this time.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And I think, women, especially in our generation in particular, like we were told, like, we don't want to get bulky, right? Like, I know we've like, I know that's kind of been debunked in various places, but is lifting going to make us too bulky? What even is that? What do you think about that?
So I think, first of all, I really want to be bulky,
right?
Like, bulk me up. Right. Sign me up for more muscle mass.
Yeah.
And so I think I approach this very differently than I used to. When I first started strength training, I would be like, oh my gosh, you're not going to get bulky by strength training. That's so ridiculous. Like, you pick up a dumbbell and you're going to, turn into a man. Right. First of all, I think like that's setting just projecting so many things onto that person and not really listening to what they're thinking about in their head. First of all, why is it so bad to be bulky? Why is it so bad to look more masculine? So we're negating the feelings that some other people might have. And I don't think that's where I want to be coming from. But I used to respond with that like knee-jerk response. And now what I do is before I say like, oh, that's not going to happen, I kind of ask why. Like, why are they concerned about that?
Right.
Maybe they are someone who actually does gain a lot of muscle mass really fast. There are people that do that, and they have, they don't like that, and that's fine, right? And then there are other people that approach it from, they don't want to look bulky because, is it the way they feel about their body, the way they feel about gender and roles, the way they feel about, strength training in general, that maybe this isn't it's some sort of barrier that they've put up, whether it's real or imagined. And I think it's an opportunity to dive deeper into whoever you're talking to and really just ask why, like 5 times, right? Like, well, I really don't want to get bulky. Is strength training going to make me bulky? And say, well, why don't you want to get bulky? And it's, oh, I just don't like the way that I look. Well, why not? And so then you kind of dive deep down into this, like, well, I actually I don't know. I mean, I guess I really don't mind if like my hands have calluses on them. I just, maybe some guy won't want to hold my hand. And I'm like, well, do you want to hold the hand of that guy who doesn't want to hold your hand because you have calluses on your hand?
Yeah.
Right. Like, so I think sometimes you just have to dive deeper, and it's, again, just like another barrier that's just like been put up. And so when someone comes to me with that, my first question is like, well, why is that an issue? And just dive deeper and learn more about that person. And in the end, to like really answer the question, you have to work really hard.
Yeah.
Really hard to get to a point where your body composition really changes. And it's going to involve nutrition and a lot of training and a lot of time and a lot of desire, like absolute passion and desire. And if you don't want that, you won't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, a lot of people don't know this walking in.
Yeah.
And for me to immediately come at that person with their like perceived barrier of, I don't want to get bulky with, like, that's not going to happen. That's stupid. Why are you asking that? Of course I wouldn't say that. Nobody says that to anybody, but sometimes it feels that way. That puts up another barrier for that person. Like, oh, you don't know anything at all.
Yeah, no, totally. And then like another myth that I'm perplexed by a little bit, like, and I actually don't know the answer to, like, is there any age that's too young to start lifting? You know how we used to think that like teenagers shouldn't do it. I forget how it was going to mess them up specifically, but what is the current sort of take on that? Like, what age is good to start lifting?
I don't think that there's really like a magic age or any sort of like standard. I do think that like movement is beneficial at every age, and kind of introducing lots of ways, a variety of movements is helpful. I don't think that, and this is coming from someone who did strength train at a very young age, because in gymnastics I did. I don't see any problem with anyone doing it at any age, really. I think that when it comes to training, because there can be a different way of looking at training versus exercising, and training is maybe, following this like regimented program with kind of a progressive overload. That may be something that we kind of check readiness, like have a little checklist that you're mature enough to kind of do the habit. It seems fun. There may be a goal, and generally that seems to be in that like teen years. But before then, I think there's plenty of opportunity to have fun with barbells, with strength training, with dumbbells, whatever it is. And I guarantee you, we'll see it everywhere. Kids are doing it in their sport. So I think it's like a very nuanced answer. I don't think there's like a specific, but I think it's resistance training, strength training is just like kind of one big piece of a puzzle. There's so many other activities that we want to introduce and have movement. And my 3-year-old will bench press with a little PVC pipe and he, thinks it's cute. And I've seen 4 and 5-year-olds do deadlift competitions. And I think it's an opportunity to just try all the things, but it should be focused on fun up to those teen years, I think. And so then we can kind of start to develop that like training behavior.
Right. That makes sense.
But again, that's kind of like I guess this is all my opinion. So
that's fair. That's what you're here for. I don't
happen to train a ton of kids, but I have trained some kids and in their teens. And I've found it to be a really rewarding job. And it's mostly about having fun, and you have to really kind of rely on the fluctuations that are happening in those ages too. So
yeah, I've been doing CrossFit for 5 years now, so I've seen like a couple of teens come into the gym and kind of progress through like CrossFit into like sort of young adulthood. And wow, like this is a very special group of they're all women, actually, of young women who are, like the next, it's like I have faith in the next generation because of the various things that these young women are and who they're becoming. It's pretty amazing to see.
I will say that like there is sort of an important part of training that should happen like in your 20s, right? Like we want to stress the system in those younger ages because we kind of develop our lasting bone health in that time frame. And so it's not like if you didn't do it in your 20s and now you're starting now, you're totally screwed. It just means that if you have the opportunity, and in this case, I would say, especially women, because we're more prone to osteoporosis. And I just think that with, particularly after menopause, when estrogen levels drop and things like that, we can better prepare for it by preparing earlier. But again, that doesn't mean that 20-year-old needs to go out and like lift super, heavy weights. It just, I think there's some importance to movement in that younger age frame, because it does really kind of set you up for the later years.
Right.
But yeah, it's of course never too late.
Yes. Well, and I think one thing, like, and we talked about, when like younger, ourselves being empowered when we're younger as well, that I just wanted to like emphasize too, that like no matter where you are, how old you are when you start, like you're always going to be better than yourself. And that goes for like your bone density is going to be better than what your bone density would have been, or your strength is going to be better than what yours. So it's always that kind of, because most of us aren't entering powerlifting competitions, and so really it's just about being our best selves. So I just didn't want to discourage anyone. It's like, oh wait, I'm 40 and I'm just starting.
Yeah. Right. And it's all about something is better than nothing. And just meeting yourself where you are. We can't go back, we can't change anything. So you just get the benefits of it and you move forward with it.
Yeah. And another thing, that stops a lot of people from starting even, is this idea that like we need to know and understand proper technique before we start a lifting program. So how important is that really?
Overall, the emphasis we put on this like proper, even the word, right? Proper, perfect, or, the right, correct form is not, it's not validated, right? We can start somewhere, and more than likely a lot of the injuries, a lot of issues are happening from like a load and titration standpoint of like loading up too fast and kind of doing a lot more weight than is necessary, or at that moment, or what you've adapted to at that point. And so when we put up these barriers of like, you should do it in this way first, or if you're not doing it right, you're going to get hurt, that just keeps a lot of people from starting. And we just need people to start. So it's always helpful to reiterate that proper form is not as like dire to just begin. But I also know that we're, doubtful people
Mhm.
that get in our heads and we get worried and we're, we have so many anxieties, and just to add this other thing into it. So I think there is some benefit to like educating yourself in a way so that you do feel better going to start. So, I acknowledge that there is a benefit to having that description of a form that is efficient, that works for most people, and following that, because it builds confidence and gets you capable of taking that first step. But even when you're doing it, you don't have to be perfect, and nobody should expect you to be perfect. You're just practicing, you're just learning. And I think the thing I enjoy about strength training in the way that I train folks is generally the rep range is small, somewhere in the range of like 4 to 8 reps at a time. And we're doing somewhere like 4 to 5 exercises for like weeks at an end. And that's it.
Mhm.
Right. So it just becomes this like repetitive routine of like, we're doing the same thing every time. And so like, if you were starting with barbell training, you might start with the empty bar and you just do the empty bar and you do 3 sets of 5 reps or something. And then the next time you come in, you add a little bit of weight and you do the same thing. Right. And you're just trying to create a repeatable movement pattern. And ultimately what it comes down to is efficiency. And that might look different on lots of different people. And there's also just like so many different ways to squat, so many different ways to bench press. I mean, I go into the gym and I see 12 different kinds of deadlifts. So I think there's things that work for some people and they don't work for other people. And it's really about finding what works for you. And that kind of sucks when people hear it, because then they're like, well, then there's no rules and nothing matters and I can do whatever I want. And that seems overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you go into like Costco and you're like overwhelmed by all the things you can buy, right? Versus going into like a little mini mart and you have one choice of like one little milk. And so I think people like that, but then we also have to be flexible so that we can get people started. I guess, I don't know if that my Costco metaphor.
I loved your Costco metaphor. I was like, yeah, I'm a bit like that. Like give me the one milk to choose. Not that I find it like overwhelming, but I'm just like, I don't care. I just don't care. Just tell me how to do it or tell me which milk.
Yeah. Which, is like the broader discussion of like the internet. It's just everything's out there. You Google it in one way, you'll get this answer. You Google it another way, you get that answer. And I think that's where a lot of people feel stuck, right? Because it's like, well, you can just do anything. You can do any of these things and they're probably fine. And so I think having like a trusted source and having someone who says, this is what we think works well for most people. And you can start here, but still building in that flexibility, building in that like, give yourself a little bit of grace. You're not going to be that good at it when you get started, and that's fine. You're not going to get hurt because of it. So it's finding that balance between it, which is probably the answer for everything.
Yeah. And the other, I'm guessing this is going to be a similar answer, but the other thing that we've sometimes hear is like, before you start lifting, you need to do this 6-week mobility program, and that can be limiting too. Cause like, I didn't want that. I wanted to start lifting. So like, how does mobility fit in, or flexibility? How flexible do you have to be before you can do a deadlift?
Well, what I have found that is if somebody walks into the gym or they sit down and talk with me and then they stand up, they could probably do all the things I'm going to have them do. Right.
Amazing. Yeah.
And that's not, there are definitely like certain exceptions, of course, but like true mobility means just like the ability to move and being mobile enough to move in the patterns that we're being asked to in most strength training kind of programs. We already have that movement pattern. And I think the term mobility has been kind of like construed and like exaggerated in the fitness world. And it kind of sells us on these various interventions or tools or things. And it's sexy, right? And it's also like, it's like safer in my air quotes, right? Like it feels safer. Like if I spend time doing this, then I won't get hurt. Right. And again, that goes into that like fear narrative. And I just think that, again, is just putting up barriers to getting people started. And so I think it's again, another, we're trying to be perfect, right? You're trying to be this like perfect mobile person that doesn't really exist. And we can still move with the body that you have at this moment. And while you're strength training, your mobility in those movements will improve because it's happening under a load. And then when it comes to things like stretching, like we might get like this kind of short-term relief, but it's not at all proven to improve performance or prevent injuries. It's just like not scientifically based.
Right.
And so if it feels good, do it, right? I'm never going to be like, if somebody's stretching and they're like, it just really makes me feel good, like I can then get under the bar and squat. Great. Go for it. Awesome. Love that for you. Right. But I'm probably not going to prescribe a whole bunch of things without the presence of some interest or, need for that. So yeah, I think it's better to kind of focus on like a specific, task and that movement and kind of build from there. And that is more proven to increase performance and things like that versus the mobility. But again, like I only know what I know. And then there's always going to be exceptions.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be times where we need those things. And if you want to do a back bend, you're going to have to practice back bends, but you're not going to get a back bend from doing barbell squats.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I want to ask you, we have a lot of people in our audience who are endurance athletes. You said you're a lifelong rower. I know you're a rowing coach. And I want to ask this question in two different ways, because I think we often struggle to figure out like how, there's a lot of talk about this in the fitness industry, like how we combine strength training and endurance training, right? So like, first of all, if you are an endurance athlete primarily, like those are your goals, you're maybe running a marathon or you're doing a triathlon, then how do you best fit strength training into your kind of weekly program?
Well, when I approach this kind of situation with, most of the time I'm working with like individual athletes if they come to me, so I can kind of individualize it based on like their needs and what they're specifically doing. But like if we speak about it more generally, if you're coming in with some other movement pattern or sport that's like the priority, first of all, we kind of, hopefully, if you're coming to me, you've already kind of bought in to the fact that strength training might be like the game changer for you. But if not, then we start there, right? With kind of figuring out like how this might help you excel in your sport of choice. And the double benefit of that is that like also it will just help with your overall health and, aging and moving forward and the other things you want to do. But I think for most people, if they're already bought in, then we don't need to start there. But I think the goal is to figure out a way where that strength training is more of like a complement to their endurance training, and it's not causing additional fatigue and stress. It's simply kind of uplifting as you go. And I often find there's certainly like an overlap period of time where you have to adjust and adapt to those changes. So sometimes in the beginning, we have to be like really clear up front about that. Like, hey, you're about to add a whole bunch more stress into your training journey. And so there might be some ups and downs there. And so you kind of have to come in with that perspective. But for the most part, like if I had to pick like, 4 or so things, it would be, I'm going to prioritize compound movements. So I'm going to pick things that are going to work multiple muscle groups at the same time. And those are, your squats, your bench press, your deadlift, your overhead press, maybe some lunges, things like that are kind of increasing overall general strength and stability. So that's just going to allow you to become more efficient in whatever your other activity is, which is probably knowing your community and endurance activity, right? And then we'll certainly look at that like frequency and volume. And so this kind of depends on like what kind of sport you're participating in and what season you might be in. And so if you're starting strength training, adding it in, you may pick a season in your other sport that has like a little lull, right? Where you might be able to prioritize the strength training, just honestly, so you can just like do it as many times as possible so you get better at it, right? Like if you only do it once a week, you're going to forget. And so you just want practice. And so you have to think about like when you started practicing swimming or, you practiced it a lot. So it's kind of the same idea, but generally I think you can fit in strength training 2 to 3 times a week. I think that's great. You're going to focus on quality over quantity, right? So we're looking at getting the most bang for a buck, which takes us back to those compound movements. And anything less than 2 days a week, it's just not enough for you to keep up in a new thing. Now, if you've been strength training for a year or more, and you go into a big high season for your other sport, you might be able to drop it down to 1 lift a week and kind of maintain, right? But I think in the beginning, you kind of want to like give it a little more. 3 days a week, great, optimal. Doesn't need to be more than that. That's totally fine. And I think a lot of people think, oh, I need to train 4 days a week and do this and do that. And it doesn't need to be that much. The third thing we would kind of focus on would be just like recovery, right? Recovery and periodization. So we're kind of looking at the way you're responding to it. How are you adapting to it? And making sure that we're allowing for enough recovery from the 2 sports and maybe arranging those practices at different times. Some people might prefer the strength training to happen first because it's just kind of requiring a little more of their focus. It's a new thing. It also might be happening at a higher intensity if you're like an ultra marathon runner, right? Like I'm not an ultra marathon runner, so I know nothing about it. So I probably shouldn't say anything more, but maybe most of your stuff is done at a lower intensity for longer, right? But kind of focusing on that recovery and then, adjusting that program to align with your phases of training and those schedules. And then the fourth thing and I've said this before in like this community, but like the individualization of the program can come later.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That wasn't where I expected you to go with that. Yeah.
So what works for the triathlete and the mom who is 6 months postpartum and the, ultra marathon runner and the, person who's never trained before, I generally would train them all about the same in the beginning because 1, it's all about getting started. 2, it's just about learning the movements and like slowly building up. And 3, we're just looking to get you stronger than you are right now in this very general way. And so your strength training does not need to look like your sport.
Right.
And I think that's what we get really caught up in is that I'm very special. I do this one thing and I need to get better at climbing the hills in the 50th mile of my cycle or or whatever it is. And in actuality, you would just benefit from getting stronger. And that's not to say like if you get your own individual program, like that's like a waste of your time. And like, no, that's also real. That's great. Awesome. Right. But it's not necessary. And when you think, oh, I need this special thing just for me, then it puts up the barrier. You're less likely to do it, right? It's not there ready for you to grab. And so I think that is sometimes not fun to hear because you're like, oh, I'm just like everybody else. But it does make it easier to just start because here it is. Here's the program. You can do it and you can do it and you can do it. So it's just beyond that, it's just striking that like right balance, right? Between your 2 different movement patterns, communicating, listening to your body, paying attention to stress recovery and all those things. But then it's also just get started.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you just said about it's not specific. It's a specific individual. I kind of I totally buy into that. But I'm thinking about my own journey, like as an athlete, like near the end of my Ironman career, I had a coach who noted, like I used to ride with her, right? And she was like, like you are using your engine to climb the hills. Like you're not using strength in your legs. Like you're using, and she's like, I suspect if we make you stronger, you will ride better. It's a very simple, like sometimes the observations are just as simple as that. Like I had spent, probably 13 years of a pro career without anyone kind of going, wait, you're gearing down and spinning. Why don't we try like slightly higher gear and see if we can make you stronger? Right? Like, okay. And so then, and same thing, like the way that was the only year of my career that I had a very structured strength program. Right. And it's like in the winter, the off season, it was the least, it's like the time of the least specific. Right. So like, the least like I could do an all around strength program that made me strong, just like a stronger human and a better athlete. Right. And then we kept the strength in all year because it was helping me, and it did help me be a stronger and faster rider ultimately. But like when we got closer to the race in those weeks, I might be doing like essentially only squats and lunges, like the things that were most specific to where I needed to improve.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would put that together with, say, like a long ride. So I might do the squats and lunges in the morning and then do my like 3 or 4 hour zone 2 ride after that. And that's just like, it was like, that's the most specific thing for my sport where I'm on the bike for 5 hours. Right. So like, that's the kind of like, and it's like, there's nothing special about that program. There's nothing special about squats and lunges,
Yeah. But I think, that's exactly like the kind of progression that you would expect too, right? Like you just generally start. And then as you continue and grow, even if your only sport of choice is strength training, right? Which is a direct line to powerlifting. But it doesn't have to be, but it still gets more specific, right? And there's certainly arguments about it. It's like an hourglass, right? You start very general and then you get more specific. And then as you get so specific, sometimes you need to do like weird things, like more general things. And that actually makes you better as you get even more advanced.
Right.
Right. So I kind of like to think of it as that hourglass shape. Mm-hmm. Right. Which is probably the same way you entered your sport now. It's just you're in the center of your hourglass right now.
Right.
And so you think everything has to be in the center of that hourglass, and it doesn't. It's a different thing. And hearing you say like, we could switch to the higher gear and like, you're going to get stronger. Like you could do only that. Right. You could switch to the higher gear and like always cycle at the like harder setting. And that would probably increase your strength. But as your coach knew, and as you probably know now, is getting off the bike and doing something that has you creating more force against an external object is going to get you more strong. Faster than just the cycling. And so that's kind of where I'm like, it doesn't need to be specific to your sport. The strength training doesn't need to look like your sport.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to convince someone because they're like, well, how does this apply? Right. Then the strength it's not specific. Strength is not specific.
It's so interesting. Yeah.
So it's getting someone off. I deal with this all the time with people in rowing too, because rowing is very similar to cycling in that there's a damper, or at least the Concept 2 rower, where you can put the damper up and it pulls more air in. Right. It's like a gear setting on a bike. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people say, well, I can get a lot stronger by rowing at this, elevated pulling in of air, height. And what it does is it could allow for like a breakdown in form. It's not necessarily the most efficient way to row, and it's probably not the most efficient way to cycle. And so that's why you want to kind of pull it away. Mm. So I guess if there was one like thing, it would be strength is not specific.
Interesting. So then when you say that specifically, what would, so if I'm doing squats and lunges to improve my cycling, like what non-specific things would I also add to that program?
Well, I think anything leg related there, right?
Okay.
Like in the beginning, that's kind of where we're going. As you became more strong and you were applying it specifically to your cycling, it became more specific, and that you kind of dropped out some of the upper body things that weren't clearly carrying over, because we're trying to not only be efficient in the sport, but also in like your time and your capacity and what you have, room for. So that's where that, you kind of do get more specific. And it may be at the time you do things that you do cycling with the higher gear, because you've adapted to that stress. You're more prepared for that stress. But I think that in the beginning, which generally is where I'm talking to people, because if you're like, how do I start strength training? The answer is it doesn't need to be specific. Right. If you've been strength training for years and you're also, elevated in this other sport, it probably does need to get a little specific, and you need your own individualized plan. But in the beginning, it's just not as necessary.
Okay, so speaking of people who are at the beginning, we're working on a secret project. This is like a spoiler alert. So, if you're new to strength training, how do you get started? We're working on, I'm going to tell everyone, we're working on a new Feisty course. Cassi is a big part of it, and it's called Strong. And essentially we introduce you to all kinds of concepts about strength training, including like what physiologically exactly what's happening, phases, like life phases in terms of what to do if you're midlife or postpartum or perimenopausal, all of that stuff. And then we get into some very specific, the technique stuff that we talked about before, like just that introduction to like, how do you do a squat and those kinds of things. And then Cassi has provided a program as well for folks who want to get started. So what have you found? Tell us what's great about the course. Why is it a good place to start? Super plug here.
Well, I think if we go back to like, if you're new to strength training, how do you get started? Right. So you get started by starting. Right. And so you just have to start. You have to just take action and begin. And what we're trying to do is create entry points for that starting, right? We don't need you to overthink it. We don't need you to go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff if you don't have it or you don't have access to it. You can simply just start with yourself, your body. And ultimately the goal would be to kind of progress from there. And so again, the most important thing is just start. So find your starting point, and we will have multiple starting points. The second thing I would say that is kind of what I've been talking about is just like, you have to just embrace imperfection. And I think this is somewhat applicable to your group too, because I know you do have a lot of athletes and really high level athletes that I've come across. And so you're at a stage in your career where you're good at what you do, right? You're like, I know what I'm doing now, and this is all new, and you're not going to know what you're doing, and you're going to feel like a idiot, and you're not going to know what bar to pick. And, and so the key is you just have to really just be open to learning, listening to your body, and like just making those adjustments as you go. It's not going to be perfect. You're not in the middle of your hourglass.
Right. And when I think about myself, like when I was in my 20s and I was at university, and I was in this like I was in university in Edinburgh in Scotland. So it's not like an NCAA program, right? But we were in kind of this little mini elite athletes program or whatever. And I remember hearing we had a speaker series, and someone said no elite athletes should be using like the Nautilus machines. Like you should all be doing body weight stuff and barbells and dumbbells. And I remember like looking at the like barbell area and thinking like, I don't even know what to do in there. Like I would feel like nobody taught me
Right.
Yeah.
So it was like
Yeah.
my strength routine was like 100% in the Nautilus area where it was like very clear, the little pictures that tell you what to do, like I wasn't going to walk in and pick up a barbell. Like what? So I think like part of it and part of the course too is like designed for like that person who's like to bridge that gap between the scariness of like what is it, what do I even do with this equipment, just like to take away all of that stuff too. So like you have this, you feel empowered to go in and go, okay, I know how to start. And like with your reminder, it's great, Cassie, like that it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Like you don't have to feel like everyone's criticizing your deadlift technique.
Right.
You can just go in and try and practice with just a barbell, and that's and just feeling empowered to do that. I think that's a big point of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think, another thing would be like begin with exercises you enjoy or exercises right? That can also be a way to kind of get started. But going back to when we were talking about like that proper form and that kind of barrier, what we are trying to put out into this program is here are ways that you can do it so you do feel comfortable trying it, right? So you're not just picking from some wide array of internet videos and being like, which one's the right one, right? We're going to say, this one is a good one. Try this, right? And then if you determine that doesn't work for you, we're here to help you, right? There's always going to be additional help to help you through it. But for the most part, it should generally apply to everyone. And so that's kind of like, to your point, I'm like, yeah, just start, just do it. Just go grab the barbell, do it. And you're like, oh my God, a barbell? Which barbell?
Yeah. And those plates, the plates look so scary when I really didn't realize there's like ones that are only 10 pounds, sometimes even 5 pounds, right? You're like, I just look at Olympic lifting plate. It was like, oh my God, it's crazy.
Right. So that's the other part. Like we're going to say, here's some different barbells. Here's how to know what size that barbell is. This is how to pick the best one that you want. And, it's going to be the best you can do over, an online course. But if you can walk into a space and feel just a little more confident in the choices that you're making, then we've done our job. And I think it's, again, that fine line between like just start, but also here's some information that will make that a little bit easier for you. And then as you go through the program, like the idea is that we're gradually increasing intensity. So, where that starting point may be, if you're starting with a body weight or you're starting with dumbbells or you're starting with a barbell, all of them are still going to increase intensity over time, but it's still on your call. And then if you started with body weight, you can imagine that your body weight's going to tap out at some point, right? Because you only have so much body weight. And so the intensity increases as you kind of progress through the different types of programs. And so there's multiple ways that we can do that, but that's kind of an important part of this, is we want it to get gradually harder, heavier, the challenge, because you're adapting to the stresses that we're applying. And throughout that process, yeah, you need to like listen to your body, but you're like, what the hell does that mean? My body's like, I hate this. I regret all my life choices. And so we give you more qualitative ways to determine what's appropriate for that weight or that selection for that exercise. And so instead of it just being very nuanced and based on your feelings, we can look at things like how fast the things are moving, how many more reps do you think you can do, and then you apply that. And again, just like learning to squat, that takes practice. And then I guess one of the bigger things I think with providing a program in this way is that we're providing some level of consistency to the process, in that we're giving you something for an extended period of time that you can follow and you can repeat and you can build on. Because once you kind of learn those ways of auto-regulating the weight on the bar, you can kind of continue the process for as long as it works. And then in the end, If you get to a point where it doesn't seem to be working anymore, then you will hopefully feel more empowered, more educated to then reach out and find the thing that does work for you or that keeps it going. But if you're here, you might not know that. You don't know what that looks like. You don't know how to ask those questions. You don't even know what the questions are, right? So hopefully at the end, you'll have an ability to ask the questions that you need to get answered. And then I would say, I think I said this before, but having a trusted resource is so helpful. Because if you're here and you're already listening to Sara, you've already listened to other things, right? So like you have developed some sort of trust in this group that you can then put a little bit of that faith in, and you can move forward with it. And then also, it's not just gonna disappear. Right? There's people behind it. There's support there. We have very specific ways to get more support, very specific ways to say, I've done the thing. I started the thing. I did it. I picked up a barbell. I went to the gym. I'm doing my deadlifts. I don't know if I'm doing it right. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to trust to tell me if I'm doing it right. We will tell you. We have ways for you to get those form checked and then feel more comfortable in moving forward, right? So you don't have to do it alone.
Absolutely.
So those are the big things.
I love that. I love that. Okay. So the course is called Strong. We are recording this well before, so it's going to be on womensperformance.com. Just go under courses and we will put that link into the show notes if you want to check that out. Cassi, thank you so much for being here. How can folks follow you, or find, more programs from you?
Well, I work with Barbell Medicine. So I do all my online coaching through Barbell Medicine, and they are sort of my largest resource and for all the things. And we have an array of templates, and what you will find there is not going to be all that different from what you'll find here with us. And it's a great kind of next step. And so that's kind of, again, a really helpful part of this program is that, like, it's not just a one and done kind of thing, right? We're really setting you up for like a lifelong way of training. And I think that is just immeasurable. And when you're, again, have this onslaught of things out there that you can pick from. But so I work with Barbell Medicine, teach people online all over the world, even if they've never lifted before. And then I see people in person in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I run small group strength training, and I love just kind of building community around it. And I'm sure you have the same experiences in all the sports, but this one's no different. It can sometimes feel a little isolating when you're just lifting in a gym alone, but there are ways to make it more a bigger community around what you're doing. And you can find me at my website, which is just CassiNiemann.com, and on Instagram at Cassi.Niemann. And yeah, I'm kind of all around these days.
Amazing. Well, we will throw
one more thing. Yeah. Also, I do put out a ton of rowing content with You Can Row Too. And so while I don't compete in rowing, I don't, if you didn't know, there's no water in Albuquerque. So I just moved here 2 years ago, and sadly, there's just nowhere to row competitively. So I don't get to do that anymore, but I do spend a lot of time on the rowing machine. But, kind of finding that balance between those two modalities. But I do put out a lot of content about rowing in as an efficient way as possible. And so that is with You Can Row Too. So, yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. This is great.
Endurance sports should be accessible to everyone, right? That's why we are so excited to be partnering with Motive. Motive is one of the fastest growing training apps in the world today, with thousands of amateur athletes signing up every month and a nearly perfect 4.9 star rating in the App Store. You are not a template, and your training plan should not be either. Prepare for running races, triathlons, cycling events, duathlons, or swim runs, however your season schedule shapes up, and get training written by some of the best coaches in the world in each discipline who know what it takes to help amateur athletes reach their goal on race day. The app takes the training written by those experts and then creates the most optimal training plan for your schedule, abilities, and goals. Plus, the training is fully customized to your race schedule, how much you can train each week, your current abilities, and the goals you want to achieve in your race. You can use the app for free as long as you want, or get all the upgraded features from the app for just $19.99 a month. But as a Feisty listener, you can sign up at mymotive.com and use the code Feisty for 2 months of full premium access. That's right, you get 2 months of premium for free. So you quite literally have nothing to lose. So head over to mymotive.com, mymotiv.com, and use the code Feisty, Feisty. And on a personal note, I know the founder of Motive, and he is driven to make triathlon and all endurance sports more accessible for the athletes who care about their performance, but who aren't quite ready for a full-time personal coach. If that sounds like you, definitely try the app for 2 months for free. You literally have nothing to lose. As a lifelong runner and triathlete turned CrossFitter, I am stoked to announce that the athletic eyewear brand Tifosi Optics has joined us as a partner here at Feisty Media. Tifosi sports glasses hit all the marks for athletes. They're shatterproof polybicarbonate, so the lenses not only reduce glare, but also offer scratch resistance, which I 100% need. They stay in place when you are moving. The hydrophilic rubber nose pads actually get more grippy the more you sweat, so they are secure and don't slide down your face even when you're running in hot conditions. No matter what sport you do, Tifosi has shades for you. Whether you love tennis, fishing, pickleball, running, cycling, or just hanging out on the beach. They are super reasonably priced, which I love, so I can have multiple pairs that go with any outfit. And of course, Feisty listeners get a special discount. So head on over to tifosioptics.com and use the code FM20. FM as in Feisty Media to get 20% off your order. That's FM20 at tifosioptics.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to make it easy for you.